Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is wherever you are. Welcome to Beach Walk Blog, and today again we're continuing with the heart rate training and heart rate zones subject for the Beach Walk blogs. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about max heart rates. Now there's a number of formulas for I call it guesstimating your max heart rate, and I see this a lot all over the socials. You know, a couple of things. Oh, my maximum heart rate is blah blah blah, and I just ran a 5k race and I went over my max. Well, you didn't go over your max, you went over your guesstimated max, and that probably came from a formula, and those formulas are what I wanted to talk about. Another thing that happens that I see a lot over the socials is you know, I just can't run in my zone 2. Every time I run I'm in zone 5. Okay, so what's probably happening there is, again, you're using a very inaccurate guesstimation formula, and when you go and do your run you do not fit with that formula, and therefore, because you're calculating your zones off of a guesstimation formula, it puts your zones all at inaccurate levels. So what do we do about that? Well, it's pretty simple. We do a max heart rate field test. Now I just want to go back to the formulas. There's various formulas. The Fox formula, 220 minus your age. It's probably the one with the biggest margin for error. There can be as much as, you know, standard deviation plus or minus 12 beats per minute. I've seen more as well. I've seen 15. That's a huge margin for error. So I would not be using the Fox formula. There is also the Hunt formula, the Goleta, I think it's pronounced Goleta, and then there's the Tanaka formula as well. They're all different formulas, and they're all based off different studies that have been done, and yeah, you know, you can use one of anything but the Fox formula. Anything but the 220 minus your age is probably going to give you a better idea of your max. I still don't think it's a great way to calculate, because it's not a calculation, it's a guess, really. It's a guesstimation. So you know, if you're going to be actually training and you want to get a accurate outcome, you're best off just testing it. But here's the problem with testing. Testing requires you to go hard. And it really does require you to get super uncomfortable and go really hard. But it also requires an element of knowing your body and knowing some pacing and knowing what you're capable of. Because it kind of requires you to set out at a certain pace and then push it at the end. So, you know, just a simple field test that you can do. You can do 4 2-minute all-out efforts. So of course this is after a 10 to 15 minute warm-up. You then go for a 2-minute hard effort with a minute recovery, a 2-minute hard effort with a minute recovery, a 2-minute hard effort with a minute recovery. You'll do 4 of them if you can, and the highest that your watch records, your heart rate, is your max. Now you have to go hard, and you might not be able to complete all 4. You might not, and it's okay if you don't. Okay, that's one way to do it. My kind of preferred way for most people who are a little bit more experienced, spend a little bit more time as a runner, and they know their pace is a little bit better. What I would do is warm up for 10 to 15 minutes, easy jogging, and then I would go for 1 mile at your almost your max mile pace, and then for the last 400 meters of that mile, make sure you are giving it all you've got, absolutely everything you've got. So the idea is that you spend a few minutes really kind of pushing your heart rate up, and then you know, because there's a little bit of give and take in how your body's going to feel from one day to the next, then you might have improved, you might have got better since your last race or whatever. So go for an all-out mile, and then the last 400 make sure you are literally all out, and then even narrow it down even more to make sure that in the last 100 you are giving it all you've got, with the idea of finishing the mile at your fastest pace. So when you cross the mile line, an imaginary mile line that is, you're going to get to the finish of your test, and you're going to be able to be still just hanging in there at your absolute max pace. All right, and that's not going to be your 100-meter max pace, of course. It's going to be what you've got left in the tank after giving it what you can for a mile. All right, so the better you know your 5k race pace, and the better you know your 1 mile fastest mile, and obviously, of course, assuming you've been consistent with training and not had any big breaks in training, you're going to be quite accurate with that max heart rate based on your current ability to push the pace and maintain it. Okay, so then what you can do is you can program your Garmin or whatever watch you're using to give your max heart rate, and then it will calculate your zones. Yeah, pretty accurately it will calculate your zones off that max heart rate. Okay, now there is another way for more experienced runners using a tested lactate threshold level. And of course, I'm not talking about going into a lab and being tested here. I'm talking about doing this out, we call it a field test, where you're just out in the, you know, on the beach maybe, or out in a park or on a track. Of course, that's probably the best place to do it. You know, doing these things out where you're not in a lab. Now, of course, if you do have access to a lab, fabulous, do it in a lab. Not everybody does, of course not everybody can afford to do that as well. It can be expensive to do that. These are really good ways that you can just go out and do it on your own, test it, and get a really great idea of your actual, maybe not 100% true max, but it will be pretty close, and it will be close enough for most people, and it will be more accurate than any of those formulas will be, because it will be tested on you. Okay, so yeah, do one of those tests and see how it goes. When we get into the lactate threshold test, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be running for well, there's two that you can do. The best one really is to run for 50 minutes to an hour at your maximal sustained pace for that time. So this is something where the more experienced you are with running and with training, you're going to be able to dial in that pace much better. And also there's, you know, criteria for saying whether it was a good test or whether it was a failed test. So if it was a good test, you're going to get to the end of that time and you're just going to you're going to want to say, I'm done, no more, can't run another step. That's going to be a real good test. And then what you're going to do is you're going to get to the end of that test, and then you're going to look at the last 20 minutes heart rate of that test, and that's going to really give you a good guide. You're going to average the last 20 minutes. That's going to give you a really good guide as to where your lactate threshold heart rate is, because it's got to be sustained. Okay, for me that's the best one because it's the truest test. Anything that involves a lesser time and then calculating on top of that is not going to be as accurate, because, you know, as we find out, and this kind of takes me into a slightly different subject here, which is estimating race times. The better we test, the more accurate we're going to have an idea of our race time, right? for any given distance. So if I'm testing, if I'm going out there and running 5Ks and 10Ks, and then I look at my Garmin and say, wow, my Garmin says that I could run a marathon in 2:40. That's what my Garmin used to say to me, or my race pace predictor was for a marathon off my 10K time or off my 5K time. And I'd just sit there and chuckle and laugh to myself and go, yeah, right, that ain't gonna happen. And the reason why I know it's not gonna happen is because, you know, the shorter races are more, you know, for most people, for most general public, are more geared to people who are more powerful, more anaerobic, higher end aerobic, more, you know, bigger musculature, that kind of thing. You know, people that run marathons, run them fast, tend to be lighter weight, leaner, those kind of things. So, you know, for me as a power athlete, which I always was when I was younger, I am not going to be going out there and running a 2:40 marathon, regardless of what my 5K time or my 10K time says. So that's just not going to happen. So race predictors, you know, the more accurate our testing is, the more accurate our testing and our training is, to kind of guide us to the longer races, the more accurate our predictions are going to be. You know, if I based a marathon time off of my 5K time, there's no way I'm going to go out and run a 2:40 marathon based off of my whatever my Garmin says off my 5K time. It's just not going to happen. But if I go out and run a 20-mile run, I'm going to have a much better idea of what I'm going to be able to run 26.2 at. Right? It's kind of obvious, really. So the better our testing is, the more accurate we're going to be able to train. So this is why I say test your heart rate, test your max heart rate, but you have to be really good. You know, you have to be really accurate. You have to be true to yourself. Like, did I absolutely give it my max for the time, or did I kind of flunk out on it? Did I just like peter out towards the end? And if I did, it's not a true test. You have to do it again. Obviously give yourself some recovery time, because it's a hard run. But yeah, test your max heart rate and then test the test. When I say test the test, what that means is, if I guess that my lactate threshold heart rate is 150, or whatever, 160, go out and run for an hour at 160 heart rate, see if or 150 heart rate, test it. Then you'll know whether it's true. You'll know, you know, the less experienced of a runner you are, the less time you'll be able to hold your lactate threshold. Okay, that's one of the reasons why people get better at the test. So on your first test, you might not do a very good job of preparing for it and actually doing the test, maintaining the level that you should maintain, that, you know, that your lactate threshold test said that was your lactate threshold heart rate. So if I went and had a lactate threshold test in a lab and it said, oh yeah, your lactate threshold is 150, and I go, whoop-de-doo, fantastic, now I know that I should be able to hold 150 heart rate for around about an hour. Somewhere between 50 and 70 minutes is usually where lactate threshold allows us to go. It allows us to go that long for. So what I would do is I'd say, okay, thank you very much, Mr. Scientist. Thank you for testing my lactate threshold. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and test the test. So my next run, or one of my next runs to test the test, would be go out, get to 150 heart rate and hold it and see how long I can hold it for. And the more I do that, the more I train my body at that heart rate, which ties into what I said in the last Beach Walk blog, which was about doing work at the level. So specifically training at the level, not using averages. So I'd go out there and I'd run at 150 heart rate, 150 beats per minute, and see how long I can hold it for. If I can only hold it for 20 minutes, it doesn't mean that my lactate threshold test was wrong. It just means that I have got a lot of training to do to get my body and my brain to be in sync. Okay, I need to train my body to be better at clearing the lactate, and that's what lactate threshold training does, or tempo training does, threshold training does. It trains your body to clear the lactate, which makes it so that I can stay there longer, right? And if I can clear lactate more efficiently, more effectively, I'll be able to go faster for longer. And that's my goal. That's my personal goal, is to go faster for longer. My goal is not to go longer, slower. My goal is to go faster, or as fast, for longer. It's a slightly different goal, right? So test yourself and then test the test. We used to do that a lot in indoor cycling, with bikes that had wattage on the bikes, on the screen, the display screen. If it had watts as your output, it's another way of measuring effort, it's a way of measuring output. It's a bit like heart rate, but it's not really. It's heart rate is a gauge of effort, but it's on a delay. It takes time for your heart rate to build up, whereas wattage is immediate. There's also, with wattage, it is what it is. It's not affected by anything apart from what you're doing. So if I'm talking about on a bike, but it applies on running. If I'm on a bike and I pedal faster, my wattage will go up. If I'm on the bike and I increase the resistance, my wattage will go up, as long as I keep the same RPMs. If I increase RPMs and resistance, my wattage will go up. Same thing with running. If I increase my speed, my wattage has gone up. My heart rate will also go up, but it will be slightly delayed. So wattage is an immediate it's an immediate display of what I am putting in. Okay, whereas heart rate is on a delay. It takes time for your heart to respond, because it's responding to CO2. It's responding to the amount of CO2 I'm producing. So I need to work harder to get my heart to respond, to go faster, to clear the CO2, to clear the lactate, etc., etc. Okay, so yeah, test the test. What we'd do in indoor cycling was we'd say, right, so this is your lactate threshold, or this is what's called FTP, functional threshold power. Now we'll do training at your FTP level, and then in 6 weeks' time, we'll go and test your FTP again. And what we'd find is that cyclists that had trained at their FTP, previous tested FTP, would then improve. People that didn't, wouldn't. It's kind of simplistic, but that's generally what would happen. So what we'd then do is we'd say, well, we need to test the test. So if I do my FTP test and I only do a 5-minute test, that test might give me an artificially high estimation of my FTP. So if we did a 5-minute test, which is very easy to do at the beginning of each class, test it for 5 minutes and then say, okay, so your FTP is 200 watts. Okay, now let's see if you can hold 200 watts for 20 minutes. And if you get to 20 minutes and you just think there is no way I could do another minute there, then the test was probably wrong. And it favors, those shorter tests favor the real power athletes. They really do favor those power athletes. And obviously endurance is a little bit different. So there we go. All right, let's wrap that one up. So test your max heart rate. Don't use a formula. They're not very accurate. Fox formula sucks. That's the 220 minus your age. Tanaka formula, Goleta formula. There's a couple of others there that I mentioned before. Formulas, they're okay, but they're not going to give you a true reflection of you. So test you, because you're your subject. Test you, and you'll get a better result rather than using a guesstimation. Okay? Test the test. And that's it. Talk to you soon. Bye.